Welcome to the April 2021 meeting of the Wild Ones Middle Tennessee chapter. My name is Richard Hitt, and I'm the current president. We are delighted tonight to have Pam Karlson of Chicago, Illinois, as our featured speaker. Pam is a career artist and certified professional gardener and garden designer. Art, nature, and gardening have been her lifelong passions. We pick up the recording as member Andra Pruitt is finishing up her introduction of Pam.
Was featured in Doug Tallamy's book, Nature's Best Hope, exemplifying the power of urban lots. And as Richard was saying on it's page 190, by the way, 190, 191. I love the way that Tallamy describes her garden. He says, the wildlife thriving on the High Line is impressive, but it doesn't hold a candle to the species that regularly use Pam Karlson's yard near the heart of Chicago. And I've had the pleasure of seeing Pam's garden on 2 occasions. We used to rescue migratory birds together with the Chicago Bird Collision Monitors. And our team would get up pre-dawn and meet up in downtown Chicago to patrol the skyscrapers for injured birds that have collided with the windows. And we would take them to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. So at the end of every migration season, we would have a party to celebrate. And in one year, we had a party in Pam's backyard. And I think that her story is really a good one to demonstrate the power of leading by example when it comes to our gardening practices. When I saw Pam's garden, I just was overcome with a sense of peace and tranquility. And I love seeing all the wildlife in her yard that you don't typically see in Chicago. Things like frogs and weird color dragonflies that I'd never seen before were all in her yard, which, by the way, is located half a block from the Interstate 90, which is the Kennedy Expressway, and in the direct flight path of an O'Hare runway. So I knew that I wanted to do this kind of gardening someday when I had my own property. And since in the last year, we've been fixing up our yard, and Pam has been a real mentor to me. And she's been helping me with recommending plants, which, by the way, the majority of her plants will also work in our region too, yes. But you'll definitely want to, double check to make sure that it's, the right zone and soil condition, but most of her plants should work fine. So without further ado, let's listen up and take notes. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat box. And please give a warm Tennessee welcome to Pam Karlson. Take it away, Pam.
Thanks, Andra.
Pam, I'm going to mute everyone. Go ahead and unmute yourself after I do it.
Okay. Right there.
There you go.
And then share my screen.
Yes.
Right. All right. You can see that?
Okay.
All right, great.
Your turn.
All right. Thanks, Richard. And thanks, Andra. That was such a nice intro. I'm really happy to be here presenting to Tennessee, Middle Tennessee Wild Ones. I'm actually wearing a Third Man Records shirt in honor of Nashville. My nephew worked for Jack White for quite a few years. So we were down there visiting, and we saw Andra down there when we were enjoying your town. So so a little bit about our backyard. We bought our house in 1991, and it was pretty much, the backyard was grass and some scrappy trees, a little bit of a perennial garden. But I really knew that I wanted to give back as much as possible to nature. And slowly, bit by bit, over the years, I've transformed it into a habitat. And the reason I chose the backyard is because our front yard, our street is a shortcut down to the Kennedy Expressway. So I was a bit concerned about the safety of the birds. So I've really been focusing on the backyard, but I'm starting to run out of space. So, so I'm going to start looking at transforming the front yard as well. So I did all the work myself, except for a planting of a few trees, all the shrubs, all the perennials, all of that I did myself. And then 15 years ago, we had a water feature installed. We did have that done by a company to install it. So an overview. So we are located, as Andra mentioned, we are on the northwest side of Chicago, a half a block north of the Kennedy Expressway, which is here. We are bordered by busy streets. We have a paved back alley. We're near, very close to a hospital, like half a mile away, less than that. A fire station, the Metro train. We're underneath an O'Hare runway approach. So the planes fly directly over our house. In fact, my best friend in California is a commercial pilot, and she's flown over our house as she's landing planes. We're half a block from the Kennedy Blue Line, which runs here. That's the L. And then the closest forest preserve is 2 miles away. So the size of our backyard is 50 feet wide by 100 feet deep. And that includes a 22 by 22 foot garage. So the garden space is like an L. We have trees and shrubs and perennials. We have lots of natives and lots of native cultivars. Reason being is it's a very small lot. So some of the straight species shrubs get gigantic. So I have incorporated some cultivar smaller sized species shrubs. We have very heavy clay soil, which I no longer fight. I embrace it. We have a water feature, which includes a waterfall, a stream, and a pond. I don't use any insecticides or herbicides. I don't use any rodenticides, even though we live in the city. Rodenticides get into the food chain. And being in bird rescue and wildlife rescue, I've seen the results of hawks that eat rats or chipmunks that have ingested rodenticides, and it's a really awful death. It really passes along the food chain. I don't use any fertilizers. I don't do fall cleanup. I leave the leaves and the perennial stems for all the insects that live in them. I do home composting. If I mulch, I will buy locally produced leaf mulch, but you can also make your own if you've got like a leaf lawnmower chopper thing. And then my husband cuts the grass, and we use a manual push reel mower. We don't use any gas or power leaf blowers. We don't like the smell. We don't like the noise. So I do everything by hand. And then minimal outdoor lighting, because if you do too much lighting, it inhibits the insects, and it can affect the food chain again for the birds. So this is, I took this last August. This is a shot of our backyard. I have a large in-law family, so I've got 2 patios for entertaining, but the rest of it has been turned over to garden space, and I'm constantly enlarging it. In fact, I enlarged this section last fall. And then it's a waterfall with a stream, and then it goes underneath a land bridge, and it dumps into a pond behind the garage. So I'm thrilled to say I keep adding on new species. I'm now at 118. I've added 2 in the last few months. That includes 10 flyovers. So this is a smattering. I've taken all of these photographs myself from my garden. So I like to have proof, proof of what I see. So the latest ones I've added are blue-winged warbler, black-billed cuckoo, just added a great horned owl, and a Eurasian collared dove. So it's getting harder and harder to add new species. The reason we have such a wide variety, and Nashville, so I've put Nashville on the map here. This is Chicago and this is Nashville, is because we are located on a major migratory path called the Mississippi Flyway. So millions of birds fly through Nashville, through Chicago, up into the breeding grounds, way up into the Arctic Circle every spring. Each fall, the adults fly back with their babies, and they winter into the Caribbean and into South America, Central America. Now, the Gulf of Mexico, they fly that in one flight. So that's a 500-mile flight. There was just actually earlier this week, there was what they call a fallout. Andra would know what that is, because when it hits Chicago, tons of birds smash into the buildings. There was a fallout along the coast where all these migratory birds were feeding. And so it was a really beautiful sight. So in Chicago, we've documented about 400 bird species in the Chicago area since 1984. 300 or so bird species migrate through Chicagoland, some making it their temporary home. 50-ish of those birds make it their permanent home. So Nashville would be very similar in that you might have a few more because you're a bit south. So resident birds, those would be our year-round friends. This is the eastern blue jay, and I did check a lot of the maps here. A lot of these birds are down in Nashville. So the resident birds live here year-round. This is the eastern blue jay. And then typically in your yard, you would see mourning doves, the American robin, and we have them all through the winter. Black-capped chickadees here. You've got I believe it was the Carolina chickadee down there. Northern cardinal, American goldfinches, Cooper's hawks, who like to visit and eat everybody else. But their favorite meal is the mourning dove, and there's lots and lots of mourning doves, so that's okay. And we also have a lot of pigeons that the Cooper's hawks eat. So then you've got your migratory birds, and they are the ones that come through in the spring and back in the fall. So this is a common yellow-throat male. And then sampling what we typically see in our backyard: Baltimore orioles, black and white warblers, swamp sparrows, lots of different sparrows. That's a great category if you're learning bird identification. That's a fun category. Scarlet tanager, red starts, bay-breasted warbler, brown creepers, just tons and tons of warblers. So when you're developing a backyard habitat, you want to consider all the different bird diets. So the bill shape and their foraging styles varies from species to species. So you want to provide a huge variety of plants with seeds and flowers to meet the demands of these diets. So birds with conical bills, such as this red rose-breasted grosbeak, they like to eat nuts and seeds and cones. They forage in trees and shrubs on the ground, and they will come to feeders. Sparrows, big category. This is the white-throated sparrow. They nest up north. Beautiful song, but they've got that great conical bill for cracking seeds. So he's foraging on the ground. Then you've got your thin or flat-shaped beak. This is an Eastern wood pewee, which is a flycatcher. This beak is perfect for snapping birds in the air. And I've actually heard them snap in the backyard when they're catching birds. They typically get them on the wing. The warbler family, also really good for getting insects on the wing and also gleaning them off of plants. And blue-gray gnatcatchers, great shaped bill, thus their name for getting very small insects. Oh, and I want to mention, there's a PDF that I prepared that you can download that has a ton of the information covered in this presentation, all the plants, everything. So then you've got your needle-like nectar sipping, that would be your ruby-throated hummingbird. And then chisel-like, that would be the woodpecker family. This is a northern flicker, great beak for pounding into wood. They love ants. So if you see cracks in the sidewalk with like displaced soil, most likely that could be from a flicker eating ants. Great ant control, by the way, natural ant control. Also, this is a red-bellied woodpecker. They love to get grubs inside the cavities of old trees. So if you live on a larger size property that has a dead tree, I encourage you to leave it up as long as it's not going to fall on anything or anyone that might harm something, because it provides a ton of food for birds. The yellow-bellied sapsucker, again, it's got that great drilling chisel-like beak. This is on our juniper tree, and he drills holes into the wood, and sap excretes, which attracts insects. So they not only use the sap for nutrition, but they also pick at all the insects that are attracted to the sap. Then you've got probing. So the American robin, thrushes are a perfect example of probing. They like to dig into the ground, get earthworms, get grubs. Tearing meat, so that would be our carnivorous raptors. We get red tails and Cooper's hawks regularly in our garden, mostly Cooper's hawks. Filtering, so since we have a pond, we occasionally get mallard ducks. I took this one at the Forest Preserve. This is not in our backyard. But they filter out little microorganisms from the water. And then spearing. So we do get regular visitors, mostly in the spring migration of great blue herons. This is right in our backyard here, and they like to feed on our fish and the frogs. So we used to name our fish after 70s rock stars, but they've been slowly picked off by the great blue heron, so we no longer name our fish. So some of you may have seen the headlines from 2019 about a big study they did, and there's 3 billion fewer birds than 1970. So it's the numbers are massively declining. So it's a real concern. That's a 30% reduction in the bird population. The causes of that, habitat loss and fragmentation, is huge. So if we can plant in our own backyards and make a quilt of other gardens around us, that will really help. Pesticide use, just eliminate pesticide use. Insect population decline because of that. Pollution is a cause. Agriculture and agricultural runoff creates a lot of pollution. Invasive species. Cat predation. I love cats. I've had cats since I was 4 years old, but indoor only. It's better for the cats and it's better for the birds. Window strikes. You can amend your windows. You can help rescue birds in your downtown area. Just the climate change situation and extreme weather changes and the perils of migration all contributes to their decline. So many species are down over 50% since 1970. And here in Illinois, the bobolinks are down 90% since 1950. So 1/3 of North American bird species are in urgent conservation need. So there's a watch list, and they rank from numbers 1 to 20, how endangered they are. So some of the ones that rank a little bit higher on the scale that visit our backyard are American woodcocks, and this guy spent the whole day in our backyard eating and sunning himself. Cape May warbler, wood thrushes, and golden wing warblers. So as you can see, our native birds need all the help we can provide: conservation, habitat restoration, elimination of pesticide use, and pollution is key. This is a hermit thrush singing away, and this is Virginia creeper, which is a native vine that birds love. So how else can we help? We can create a 4-season bird oasis. So using eco-friendly techniques and products and plants. This is a winter wren. So the 3 main ingredients to bring in the birds are food, water, and shelter. American redstart female here. Landscaping in layers. So you want tall canopy trees, mid-level trees, shrubs, perennials and ground covers. And if you have space, a wood or stick pile. So the canopy trees, like our neighbors, have really tall trees. So I planted a mid-level tree to attract birds. And then your plant selection, as many native trees and native plants as possible. You want early to late bloomers to cover all the seasons. Nectar producing, fruit producing, seed producing, cones, just diversity and variety. And then remove invasive species. This is a Nashville warbler. So a little bit about invasive species, the ones you're going to want to remove and never plant, which unfortunately are still sold. Barberry is huge. So I'm standing at a forest preserve in Chicago. All of this is escaped barberry. They produce these berries. Ugh, it's just a tangle of barberry, which is no good. Buckthorn, euonymus, which includes burning bush and winter creeper, privet, non-native honeysuckles, Calgary or Bradford pear, which are blooming right now up in Chicago. Bad. They just populate the forest preserves. Lily of the valley, ground ivy, vinca vine, Asian bittersweet. Those are all ones you want to eliminate. So here's an example of euonymus winter creeper, which is very popular in gardens. So it looks like this in a garden. I took this right in our neighborhood, and then we were snowshoeing this winter. This is what it does. It plants itself in the forest preserves. It climbs up these trees. When it gets up here, it morphs and it produces this berry, and the whole cycle just starts all over again, and it chokes these trees out. It's nasty stuff. So eco-friendly practices, no insecticides, herbicides, no rodenticides, no chemical fertilizers, leave the leaves, leave the stems for insects to live in, reduce outdoor lighting, and then supplemental support. That's optional because most birds actually don't come to feeders. So, but a lot of them do, and that's kind of fun. So you can do feeders, you can supply water. Water's great. You can do nectar producing annuals, and then you can have nesting and roosting boxes. If you do roosting boxes and they're made out of wood, you might consider putting on these special plates. They are sold at Wild Birds Unlimited and online. This one is to let in the size of a house wren and a chickadee. It keeps out invasive species from Europe, like house sparrows, which will destroy the nest of the native birds. This downy woodpecker made this hole bigger, but since he's a native bird, I let him live in this box for winter roosting. But once he vacated and made his nest elsewhere, I attached a metal plate to keep house sparrows out. So where to start steps? I just kind of added this in per Doug's suggestion, Doug Talmey's suggestion. Start small. The way I started is I just started really small, and then I added on as I went, because I've had a very long career. I work a lot of hours. So I just took a weedy patch of my lawn and I'm like, ooh, that looks ugly. So I just expanded it and turned it into perennial garden. So just expand as you go, keep it manageable, and then just keep on going. Have fun, have a great attitude about it. It's a great workout. It's therapeutic. It connects us to nature. I'm a big advocate for doing this yourself, because you'll really be in touch with your own garden. It nurtures critters. It nurtures the earth. It's educational. I've learned a ton doing this. I took this shot, by the way, last August in our backyard. Time, as your schedule allows. For me, it's before work, it's after work, it's on the weekends. My garden's pretty mature, so it's less work now than it used to be, but I enjoy it. So it's really fun. Learn from each other. Like, I learn from my friends, I learn from my coworkers, I talk to other gardeners, attend webinars, which during COVID, that's been kind of a silver lining. Seminars and conferences. Wild Ones is a great organization. They have great seminars. Read books, join garden clubs. The right plant for the right place. So learn the light preferences, just research it. It's really easy to research it. Sun, does it want sun? Does it want shade? Does it like clay or loamy soil? Does it like dry or moist conditions, or both? There's lots of plants that take both. And I create little habitat zones based on conditions in my garden. So like by the patio, it's a little more sandy, so I can do some sandier loving plants. Then in the shade spots, I create woodland. embrace imperfection. So holes in leaves, if you get a host plant for butterflies, which I try to add as many of those in as I can, and you see holes, that means it's a success, because those caterpillars are eating your plant, and that's what you want because that feeds the birds. Learn from your mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I've made a ton of mistakes. I've learned a ton from it. Change. Gardens are ever changing, ever evolving. When I first started gardening, I thought like I planted it and then it stays that way. Not the case. And as you learn more, you're going to want to change more. And then plant densely, plant a lot of diversity. And my tip is to plant more than one. Growing up, my mom's neighbor was a really, really good gardener. She planted more than one plant, like 3 at a time, because not all plants make it. And plants have a lifespan. So you're going to have to replace some of the plants after a while. So spring migration. Here in Chicago, it starts actually like in February, but the big part of it is March through the mid part of June. So you're going to want early bloomers, lots of cover, water. This is our backyard in the very early spring. The red-winged blackbirds are the first to come in, and they announce their call very loudly. So synchronization of food sources. So not all of the birds fly in all at the same time. They are staggered by species depending on the food sources that are available. So one of the early migrants is the American woodcock. They eat a lot of earthworms. So when the earth is warming up and the worms are bubbling up towards the surface, that's when they're coming in. They start coming in early March. And this is one that was visiting our garden, and he was having a feast in our backyard on those earthworms. The warblers tend to migrate a little later when the insects start hatching. So this is a black-throated green warbler locking in on an insect. Boom. He catches it. So insects are extremely important to have in your habitat and to encourage. And if you have the right balance, you're not going to be like hanging out in your backyard and having like all these insects biting you, because it's a balanced ecosystem. The ruby-throated hummingbird, same thing. They're giant flycatchers. So this guy's or she is flying over our pond catching insects. So you want to encourage those insects. They are also believed that their migration follows the blooming of columbine up through the US. So by the time they reach here in the Chicago area, they're feeding off the columbine. So bulbs, we're all dying to see bulbs blooming in the spring. So consider adding in some native blooms. These are Clematis, wild hyacinth, gorgeous. They have a long bloom time, so the pollinators really love them. But the pollinators even love some of your non-natives like daffodils and snowdrops. I just took these this year, actually. So some of my favorite early blooming native perennials: shooting star, love it, love it, love it. It's ephemeral, so it eventually just disappears and other plants take its place. Marybells, bloodroot, wild geranium, the sedge family, carex. That is a great category to put into your garden, and it helps break up the soil. So if you have heavy clay soil, it's a good one. Trilliums, celandine poppy is beautiful. It reseeds itself and spreads all over the place. So all of these are blooming in our garden right now. Virginia bluebells, love them. Our backyard right now is a sea of blue. And I took this last spring, male ruby-throated hummingbird, right on time on May 1st, was sipping nectar from those bluebells. Prairie smoke, another one of my absolute favorites. Really interesting bloom. And then it creates this unique seed head that lasts a super long time, and it looks great backlit. This is a northern water thrush foraging around the prairie smoke. Amsonia hubrecti, blue star, great plant. It dies all the way back, but it has a very shrub-like appearance when it is in full foliage. Beautiful blue color. And this is a common yellow throat feeding amongst the blue star. It also is gorgeous in the fall. So that's a great plant. Very hardy. If you do introduce some water, or if you've got a part of your property that is kind of soggy, you can get into these water plants. So Marsh Marigold is a great one. The native Marsh Marigold, gorgeous. Ours is blooming right now in our water feature. Spiderwort, the Ohioensis, is a great one. This is a indigo bunting foraging amongst that. Great flower, long bloom time. All of these plants are listed on that PDF, by the way. Penstemon is a great category. Some bloom in shade, some can take sun. I've got a few different varieties. This is just Penstemon digitalis. I let it reseed around the garden. It's really easy to pull out and share with your friends or move it around. Some people think it might be too aggressive. It's not in my garden because it's very clay soil. And the hummingbirds love it. Love, love, love it. So ground covers, really important to cover that ground. I don't have 100% native garden. Hostas do really well here. And you know, when I started gardening, when we bought our house 30 years ago, yeah, I planted some hostas. However, if you've got really nutritious soil, there's lots of microorganisms that live underneath those hostas, and the ground feeding birds like the ovenbirds and the thrushes, they feast amongst the hostas, and it provides cover for them. So you don't have to feel like you got to rip everything out if you're starting from scratch or trying to change over your garden. Do it as your budget allows you to do. So some of my favorite native ground covers, I love pussy toes. We camped a lot as kids, and I saw these down in southern Illinois, and we have some sandy area around our patio. So I bought some at a native plant sale. It was probably wild ones. And sure enough, I did not know this, but last summer, it turns out the American lady, I actually sent this photograph to Doug and he identified it. There's the American lady butterfly and the painted lady butterfly. This is the American lady caterpillar. It is the host plant for the painted ladies and the American ladies. I mean, so cool. The wild violet, another host plant for butterflies. I just let our wild violets go, and it's a great free ground cover. One of my favorites is wild ginger, Asarum canadense. Make sure it is the native one. It blooms super early and attracts little insects that the ground feeding birds like ovenbirds and thrushes feed off the insects that are attracted to that flower. Again, the sedge family, really great category. This is the common oak sedge, Carex pennsylvanica, really good one. Ostrich fern does great. This wild stone crop is blooming right now in our backyard. That does really, really well for ground cover. So if you've got some non-native ground covers in your garden already, like my sister gave me this Lenten rose. You know, I think of her when it's blooming. It makes me feel happy. This is a barren wort. It's non-native. I planted it probably 30 years ago. So I've snaked through wild ginger, and there's all sorts of other native plants that are snaking through this area. And this is a great area for these ground feeding birds to forage in. Another sampling of letting these natives just intermingle, let them all intermingle. So you got Spiderwort in here. I've got the native alum root all in this area. I'm actually replanting a lot of that into this area. Got some hostas in here. You got some ostrich fern, some penstemon. And then just let those textures all mix together. So Virginia creeper vine, I let it sprawl on the ground. The ostrich fern. I've got some wild ginger in there. Some hosta, and then this is a milkweed. So those textures all look super cool together. Another good combo is wild geranium with tiarella. That's here. And then also, we take a lot of walks in our neighborhood, and when I see a super cool log just laying on the street or on the sidewalk, I pick it up and I bring it back, and I put it in the garden. It's like free sculpture. And then it breaks down, and all these little insects live in there, and that provides food for the birds. So it's a great way to add extra nutrient to your garden. So some really good spring mixes here. So this is like Virginia bluebell, columbine, beard's tongue, prairie smoke, all intermingling together in this area. And then you got your Virginia creeper over the fence. Got some Canadian anemone in here. That one you do have to keep it in check. You got foam flower, more sedges in here, and some spiderwort. So lawn, it's encouraged that you reduce or eliminate your lawn. However, we've got lots of nieces and nephews that like to play on the lawn, and I practice yoga. I like to practice yoga on the lawn. So I do have a little bit of lawn. However, I don't treat it. It's all natural. So because of that, the fox sparrows, tons of sparrows and tons of warblers, the palm warblers love feeding on our natural lawn. So there's lots of weeds, lots of insects for them to feed on. Native trees that we've got in our garden is Amelanker is a great category. This is serviceberry is the common name up here. It blooms very early. It produces a berry in the summer, like in June. So the thrushes, the cedar waxwings, the robins love it. And then the color in the fall is really beautiful. So that's a great category. It does really well down in Tennessee. Winter King Hawthorne. So Hawthorne trees do really well in our Chicago clay soil. When I was researching a mid-sized tree, I kept coming up on Hawthorne. So we planted this in 1995. And I'm so glad I picked it because it's really been a bird magnet. It blooms a little bit later in the season after the serviceberry is done. So the warblers are coming in now and feeding off of the insects that are attracted to the blossoms. And then in the fall, it produces a berry, and the berry clings through the winter. And by like late February, it's picked clean. So it provides a lot of nutrients for the birds. So here's some of the birds that hang out in our Winter King Hawthorne: rose-breasted grosbeaks. This is a male. Ruby crown kinglets. The kinglets are coming in right now. Lots of sparrows. This is a chipping sparrow singing his spring song. Scarlet tanagers. You've got your male and your female. Lots of flycatchers. This is the least flycatcher. Lots and lots of warblers. This is a Blackburnian warbler, and we do have a wire running through our Hawthorne, so it's a little taste of the city. Magnolia warbler. So this is a perfect example here. This guy's gleaning insects off of these buds. So that's that great beak in action. Thrushes, lots of thrushes. This is a Swainson's. And then another great category of trees is dogwoods. There's trees and shrubs. These do great in the Nashville area. Lots of different sizes. They produce a very nutritious berry, very fatty. So it's good for coming back in the fall. That's when the berry is ripe. This is a female blackpoll warbler. And this is a American redstart female in our dogwood. So tall deciduous trees. So like a lot of birds like the Baltimore oriole, they like to fly in high. You often hear them before you see them, and they scope out the area and then they come down to feed into the garden. So the tall trees are great for that. Oaks are fantastic. We've got silver maple trees in our alley. So this guy's hanging out in our silver maple. Oaks are fantastic. Doug telling me really, that's like number one. Willows are great. Cherries are great. Elms and maples are all good choices. Our neighbor has a honey locust tree that hangs over our property, and the birds really like that too. That's a native tree in our area. This is an orange crown warbler feasting in that tree. So evergreens, you want to introduce evergreens. It provides a lot of cover, great foraging for them underneath of the evergreen. Cones. So like the eastern towhee, this is underneath a globe blue spruce in our backyard. They love to feed underneath the evergreens. One of the very coolest birds that I saw in our backyard was the white-winged crossbill. It was a male, And I didn't have my camera out there at the time, so I try to keep my camera with me at all times in the backyard. But my husband did see that bird, so I do have proof. Wood thrushes, their numbers are really declining, but they regularly visit our backyard during migration. They have a beautiful flute-like song. And then Cooper's hawks, just through observation, you can learn a ton about bird behavior. I always thought that Cooper's hawks catch birds on the wing, but what I learned through observation is that they also hunt in shrubs. So this guy was like skulking along the ground and eating house sparrows, hopefully. And then also it provides areas where raptors can take their prey. This one has a mourning dove or a pigeon eating in the spruce trees. We have big Norway spruces around us. So for the last couple of years in the spring migration, we've gotten merlins, a pair of merlins flying in. They hang out for a few days, fly over our pond. So they like to hang out at the top of the branches of the evergreen trees and just scope out the area. The sap that's produced also attracts little insects. So the kinglets go crazy for all the little insects in the evergreen trees. That's a golden crown kinglet. Junipers are great. Thrushes love them. This is a robin. Cedar waxwings love them. And the berries cling onto the tree for like through the winter time. So it's pretty much a nonstop source of nutrition for them. And then if you have a very balanced habitat, you'll get spiders as well. And a lot of birds use the webbing to create their nests with. So this is a gorgeous dew-covered web in our backyard. So deciduous shrubs, many are butterfly host plants. So you want ones that produce flowers and fruit, seeds. This is a chestnut-sided warbler. The viburnum family is fantastic. This is a redstart hanging out in our viburnum. The viburnums create a berry that is very nutritious to birds. Other shrubs that are really good are sumacs, ilex, which is winterberry, cornice, again, there's shrub cornices, witch hazels, spice bush is great. There's there's so many good choices out there depending on your situation. Some other natives that we've got for shrubs, we've got Fothergia, produces this gorgeous bloom, really great for pollinators. Clethra is another good one. There's cultivars that are smaller, so I'm experimenting with some of the cultivars. The bunnies do like these plants, so I do have to cage them in the winter. Aronia is really great, and buttonbush. So this is Aronia. It gets a really pretty bloom, great berries later in the season that the birds love. Buttonbush is another good one. The hummingbirds love it. The pollinators love it. It's a super interesting plant. It likes, I have this planted in like a flooded area near our alley. If you do have non-native shrubs, as long as they're not on the invasive species list, like for instance, our neighbor's property that borders ours, they've got a row of lilacs. So the hummingbirds actually feed on the blossoms, the nectar, and it's on their property. So the birds use it for preening and shelter and fly catching over. So you don't have to initially break the bank by pulling out all of your non-native species, as long as you're not on the invasive species list. This is a Wilson's warbler hanging out in their lilac. A blue-headed warbler took a bath in our stream and preened. And the cedar waxwing, same thing. They catch bugs and hang out. And then moving into nest building season. So a healthy habitat has a lot of materials for birds to make nests. We don't get a lot of nests in our yard. I think it's because they use it so much for feeding, but our neighbors get nesting going on. This is a common grackle, and their numbers are also declining. I think they're really beautiful birds. So it's worth helping them along as well. This is a red-breasted nuthatch collecting wood from our juniper. And then robins, great parents. This is our neighbor's downspout, and they often nest in our neighbor's downspout. They collect mud from our yard and grasses from our yard. I watch them building these nests. Part of the reason you don't want to like cut down and get rid of your plant material is there's really good pith in the middle of these stems that the birds use for nesting. I actually watched a pair of catbirds last spring collecting the pith out of the stems and flying off and creating their nest somewhere. We always have catbirds in our backyard. The house wrens, I love house wrens because they have such a bubbly, cheerful song. The male flies in first. I hang 3 boxes. So the male flies, he migrates in first. He sets up a rudimentary nest in all 3 boxes. So this is him using like webbing and sticks to build those nests. And then when the female migrates in, she comes and she checks out the nests that he's built. And if she likes one of them, she'll pick him to be her mate. So that's really fun. We usually get a couple of broods each year of house wrens. We get a lot of blue-gray gnatcatchers. And when I was getting my certification at the Chicago Botanic Garden for gardening and garden design, I saw the fledglings were in this blue-gray gnatcatcher nest. So this is so cool because they use the lichen to camouflage it. I went back the next day to hopefully get photographs of those fledglings, but they'd already taken off. But I included it in this slide because it's just such a cool looking nest. So moving into summer now, lots and lots of food, lots of bounty going on. Blazing star, liatris is a great category. The birds love to feed on the seeds. Some of my favorite native summertime perennials, bee balm, the Monarda family is a really good one. There's several different types of Monarda. This one I love. Pronouncing Latin's a little tough for me. It's Fitsulusa. But the bees love it. The birds love the seeds. The Didyma is another good one. Hummingbirds love it. Joe Pye, in some gardens that can be pretty invasive. In our garden, because it's such a clayey soil, it's not. It's a beautiful plant, does really well. Wild petunia is fabulous. Cup plant is great. I'll talk about that a little more. The lobelias are fabulous for hummingbirds. The blue one does really, really well in gardens. Goat's beard, and then phlox, another really good plant. So reds for hummingbirds. This is the Lobelia cardinalis, cardinal flower, and this is a hummingbird enjoying it. This was just from last year. And then royal catchfly, another good one for hummingbirds. And then also you might get hummingbird moths. So a lot of people confuse those for hummingbirds, but they are also attracted to the same plants. And then milkweed, helping out those monarchs. We have swamp, common, and butterfly milkweed. All 3 do really well. And we have a very nice nursery of caterpillars back there. Super cool native one, rattlesnake master. I love the unique bloom. The pollinators love it. It creates a really cool seed head. Just a great plant. Filipendula rubra is another really pretty one, tall, foamy, looks great backlit. Liatris, again, a great category, several different types to choose from for different types of condition. And then volunteers. So pokeweed grows in our alley, and last year for the first time it's seeded in our garden, and I decided to let it produce. I might regret it because I know it does apparently lay down a lot of seedlings, so we'll see how it goes. But I had a blast watching the thrushes in the fall when the berries ripened. The thrushes were all over this plant, so that's another good one. You know, volunteers can really add a lot to a garden. And then just great combinations. This is Monarda mixed in with coneflower and black-eyed Susan. Just again, let things intermix. It's like a smorgasbord. Black-eyed Susan with the wild bergamot. It's like fireworks. This is Joe Pye weed with cup plant, and then the blue star in the foreground. Just a really pretty combo. Another one, nodding wild onion, and then the Missouri evening primrose. Again, all these would do well in the Nashville area. Prairie dropseed. I did want to try I experiment a lot with different types of straight species natives as well as cultivars. This is a very small dropseed called Tara. For, if you've got a super tight space, but you want a native in there, that's a nice choice because it still produces a great seed head for the birds. And then in summer, you can add annuals to the mix to prolong the season for the pollinators and for the hummingbird. So I plant a lot of salvias. This is Victoria Blue. The hummingbirds absolutely love salvia. So this one is Mystic Spires. Black and blue salvia, an annual, is a magnet. And actually, I think it's because the climate is getting warmer. These are starting to be able to overwinter up here in Chicago, but I believe they grow native down in Texas. Another hybrid would be Skyscraper. They come in all different colors. And I find the hummingbirds love all the colors. Maine Night is a perennial sage that they love. And then this is a super cool one from Central America. It's called shrimp plant. And I overwintered this in the house. The hummingbirds love this plant. Agastache, there's a couple straight species natives in our garden, but I also experiment with some annual Agastaches that grow in the southern part of the US, just to prolong the season for the hummingbirds. Some vines that do really well here. This one grows in Mexico. One of our best friends grew up in Mexico City, and he said this grows all over the place down there. Firecracker vine is the common name. Cardinal vine grows really well. And then passion flower, which is annual in, I believe, in your neck of the woods in Nashville. I'm overwintering our passion flower. And then baby season. We get lots of babies in our yard because there's lots of food. Robins are fantastic parents. Both the mom and the dad tend to the babies. So this is dad feeding the fledglings. And just so some people don't realize that fledglings don't know how to fly when they first come off the nest. So they spend the first few days on the ground, and then they slowly work their way up into the trees. This is the house wren brood going on here, mom feeding a worm to the babies. And then later in the summer, the cedar waxwings, they're one of the later nesters. So this is a juvenile cedar waxwing eating the juniper berries. And then one of the very last ones in our area to nest are the goldfinches. And again, both parents help raise the juveniles. This is dad feeding the babies. So then moving into autumn. So that's like, that was like early September. Now we're moving into the autumn area. This is our backyard in the autumn. So there's like lots of seed heads going on. There's lots of food for the migration now going back south. So some of the late blooming autumn plants, obedient plant is great. This is a hummingbird enjoying the nectar. Ironweed. There's different kinds of coneflowers. This is cut leaf coneflower. Monkshood. All sorts of grasses. This is northern sea oats. And then this is a native Agastache up here. I also have a really tall, great Agastache that does really well. Phlox. So I do some amount of deadheading on the phlox in the summer because it reblooms in the fall, and the hummingbirds love to feed off of it. And it also just provides lots of insect activity there. So this is a Tennessee warbler feeding amongst the insects. Turtlehead Cholony is another great one. This is the native one that's up here in our Chicago area, Cholony glabra, and this is a little bumblebutt in there. Hummingbirds love this plant. There's also Cholony linoni. It's a pink one, and that one is native to more of the southern part of the US, but it does well in our area as well. So I've got both. This is a red-eyed vireo feeding amongst those plants. Jewelweed is another good one. Oh my gosh, the crop of jewelweed this year for me looks great. I've been trying to get this to take off in our backyard, and it's looking like it's gonna be really good this year. The hummingbirds absolutely love it on their migration south. And then asters, another great fall plant. This is wood aster, does great in dry shade. And then it creates these seed heads that look beautiful in the winter even. Really, really great plant for dry shade. And then Goldenrods Saladago, great category. There's lots of different ones to choose from. It can be aggressive. So I tried a cultivar called Fireworks. It still gets chock full of pollinators, and then the migrating monarchs feed off of it going south. There's shade loving ones. This is elm-leaved goldenrod in the shade. And then the seed heads, sparrows and thrushes love to eat the seed heads. Wild ageratum, another good one, beautiful blue color in the fall. You can see it in the background here, just like a cloud of blue. It can be a little aggressive, but it pulls out very easily. So you can keep it in check. And then this is, again, a beautiful spider web backlit. The sun drops in the fall turn red. This is a common yellow throat feeding amongst that. And then rose mallow. If you do water features, you can introduce rose mallow hibiscus, but it can also be planted in just regular soil. It does well in wet and in dry. This is an Eastern Phoebe, and then it gets a beautiful fall color. The sweet autumn clematis that is very popular at the nurseries is actually on the invasive species list. It's from Asia. So a nice substitute for that is the native Virginiana, Clematis virginiana. So this is the native one. Virgin's bower is the common name. Gorgeous, and hummingbirds love it, and it won't destroy our forest preserves. Volunteers in the fall that do really well. The snake root popped up in our garden, and I do have to keep it in check. But boy, this gets chock full of migrating butterflies, including the monarchs and admirals. And then the asters pop up on their own as well. This is the New England Aster. And when I took this photograph, there was this gorgeous green bee hanging out on the aster. And then the seed heads, leave those seed heads up. It provides a lot of food for the birds. So this is the swamp milkweed, and I thought it looks like a crane's bill. It's just so pretty. Joe Pye, some people deadhead theirs because it's too aggressive in the garden, which I can understand. It's not in my garden, so I leave the seed heads up. Queen of the Prairie, same thing. Agastache, super cool seed head. Rose mallow adds a lot of interest to the garden. And then the coneflower seeds are one of the favorites of the finches. So this is a goldfinch feeding on the coneflower seeds. I leave those up all winter long. This is the rattlesnake master seed with a blue-gray gnatcatcher hanging out. And then leaf litter, super important. So this is in the fall. I let the leaves fall on the ground and I let them collect over the garden. This is an ovenbird finding all sorts of tasty morsels amongst the leaf litter. It was literally following me around as I gardened, like a foot in front of me. It was so cool. And then this I just took a few weeks ago. So this is the piled up leaf litter. So when the birds are flying back in the springtime, like the robins and the thrushes, they're like whipping these leaves up in the air and finding all sorts of tasty treats underneath those leaves. So that's the importance of leaving your leaf litter. So back to the winter king hawthorn now. It's producing these great berries. This is a female rose-breasted grosbeak or a young male. They look a lot like females in the fall. The yellow-wumped warblers feeding amongst it. The ruby-throated hummingbirds flycatch from the hawthorns, eastern phoebes, eastern wood pewee, and the dark-eyed juncos. So once the dark-eyed juncos return to the Chicagoland area, we know that winter is just about to approach. They come in like October, November, and then boom, we're into winter. So leaving up all those plants in the winter provides not only shelter for the birds, but it's all these insects that are hibernating and the eggs in there. And it's beautiful when that snow hits. I'm not sure how much it snows down in Tennessee, but it's still very beneficial to leave up all your plants for the not only the resident birds, but the migratory birds that will come and visit later. So the berry producing plants that produce in our garden in the winter, again, it's the winter king hawthorn and the ilex. So that's the winter berry. So this is the berries it was producing last fall, and it got picked clean by the end of February-ish. And then, you know, if you have a healthy habitat, it's not only good for your resident birds, but you also get like other birds that come in the wintertime. So you get your winter residents, which are migratory. So we get these huge flocks of like well over 100 finches. And it's a mixed flock of goldfinches. A few purple finches might be in there, lots of house finches, and then pine siskins if it's an eruption year, and common red poles if it's an eruption year. So they all hang out together in these big social flocks. We also get special visitors. So a lot of the thrushes migrate south, but some of the hermit thrushes stick around. So we will occasionally get a resident hermit thrush. And this is one hanging out with a downy woodpecker in the hawthorn tree. We get some really nice winter sparrows, American tree sparrows. They love the Saladago seed heads. And then there's eruption years. So some birds that typically stay up north, like in Wisconsin and into Canada, sometimes the food supply gets depleted. And so they end up coming farther south, maybe even all the way down into, I mean, pine siskins might come down into Nashville. But we get some years where there's a bunch of common redpolls. Some years we get none. But this is a common redpoll enjoying our garden. And then the pine siskins, they can come in huge flocks. They're very chatty, really fun to watch. Also the red-breasted nuthatches. Some years there's a ton in the winter. Great fun, gregarious bird. This is pine siskins enjoying water. So if you can, add water to your garden. So it could just be a bird bath. I call this the pine siskin drinking party. This was like a huge flock, part of a huge flock that was enjoying our stream. So to add water, you can do it through plants. So before we had our water feature, I added cup plant. And the reason is because the leaf is shaped like a cup. So it collects rainwater, and then the pollinators, the butterflies, and the birds can drink from the cup. It produces a great seed. This is a yellow warbler feeding amongst there, picking insects, but then the finches love these seeds as well. It's a very tall plant. It's a prairie plant. But you can also achieve that through, again, a hosta with a thick leaf. This one's called drinking gourd, and it collects water. So that's a way to get water into your garden. Sprinklers and soaker hoses, if you've got one running, do it early in the morning, go out there, see what birds are attracted to it. This was a black-throated green warbler enjoying our soaker hose. So other ways you can add water, you can do a simple bird bath. You can add a heater to it. You can buy a bird bath that's heated. You can do a container water garden. This is my sister's container water garden that she made. She put a little pump in there. Birds are attracted to the sound of water. So adding a pump is great. And my sister gets like big flocks of cedar waxwings at this container. You can do a fountain. You could do a pondless waterfall. So this is our waterfall. you could just add that, and there's kits where it just recycles and recycles the water. You can add a stream like we did. You can add a pond. My mom's neighbor has a rock with a drill through it, and it just recycles the water. There's a little reservoir underneath of it. And then she also has a pondless waterfall. So there's all different kinds of water features for different budgets. And then if you do add a pond and it ices over, it's really cool. It creates a really interesting textures and the snow in the stream. I keep ours running year round. I float a heater back by the intake, and it keeps going all through the season. Another great thing about adding water features is you can attract dragonflies like crazy. So they actually lay eggs in our stream. We get the nymphs. So it's super fun watching all these beautiful dragonflies, common green darners, blue dashers, white-faced meadowhawks, 12-spotted skimmers. And then the birds absolutely love it. It's just like a show. So they will thank you and you'll enjoy watching them. This is an American redstart female, yellow rumped warbler. This is a red-winged blackbird female. They nest along the Kennedy, so we get lots of redwings. Mourning warbler, black-capped chickadees, black pole warbler, white-crowned sparrow. These guys nest up north too. Beautiful song. Gray catbirds. Lincoln sparrows, which is one of my favorites. They have this really fine streaking, really beautiful, beautiful sparrow. Louisiana water thrush. They actually use our stream and water feature to forage in. And then yellow warblers are really attracted to water. So we get those in the summertime coming to eat. And thrushes, hermit thrush, cardinals, which is the Illinois state bird. And then the Cooper's hawks, they like bathe in it, they soak in it. So feeders and supplemental feeding, optional. So I do feed the birds. I keep hummingbird feeders out. The latest sighting, I tell people to keep their feeders up through November, because the latest sighting, we get them all through October in our garden. I think they know where to find the food now, so they stop here. The latest one we've had was November 11th. So keep those feeders up and keep them clean. The Orioles love oranges and grape jelly. You might get orchard Orioles. This is a juvenile, and then it takes 2 years for them to get into their full adult plumage. Beautiful, beautiful birds. So that the food that I put in our feeders, I use whole sunflower because it's got the whole meat, heart, and everything. It's more nutritious than the chips. Safflower, black sunflower seeds, thistle seed, mixed nuts, and peanuts in the shell. The blue jays love that. It's really fun. You can buy these cylinders. So that's a cleaner way to feed. You can put trays underneath there to catch the debris. If anybody from Chicago is watching, Wild Birds Unlimited in Glenview is great. I always say go to a store that has really fresh seed. You want to be able to smell it. So you want to offer fresh nuts and seeds. You can offer suet and mealworms. You want to keep it dry. I keep mine in a metal container in the garage. I never get bugs in it because it's sealed. Offer a variety of feeding platform, bell, tube, thistle, peanut, suet, because there's all different feeding styles for the different types of birds. You want to keep them clean. So if you have a Wild Birds Unlimited near you, that's a really good place to go. Tim Joyce is the manager at the one in Glenview. He's fabulous and super knowledgeable. So here's some of the nut eaters: red-breasted nuthatches, downy woodpeckers, red-breasted woodpeckers, the eastern blue jays. The platform feeders, the rose-breasted grosbeaks really like the platform style. Those are gorgeous birds. They should be coming in any day now. Pine siskins. So if you want to feed the native the native species, because like the house finches are actually introduced from the Mexico area, New Mexico area here in Chicago. So the native ones to our area are pine siskins, goldfinches, red poles. They can feed upside down. So if you want to feed them, I always provide an upside down feeder because they're a bit more shy about the way they like to feed. And even downy woodpeckers like the thistle. And then suet feeders, there's all different styles of suet. This is a hairy woodpecker, excuse me, a downy woodpecker, red-breasted nuthatch, another downy, all different styles of suet feeders. I like this one. It's got a roof over it. So the birds can hang upside down. And so like starlings and stuff won't decimate your suet, and you won't break the bank feeding the starlings. So what other benefits from a bird garden? Oh my gosh, all the pollinators that come to visit. It's just endless. Honeybees, all different kinds of bees. That's like a whole nother category that's super fun. That's a buttonbush. Katydids, cicadas, the cicada killer wasp. So those are neat. All these wasps, like the great black wasp, these are solitary wasps. I've never been stung by these wasps. Milkweed bugs, all sorts of butterflies, the monarchs, tiger swallowtails, eastern black swallowtails, spicebush swallowtails, pipevine swallowtails, the red admirals, which are migratory, the painted ladies, which are migratory, skippers, all different kinds of skippers. This is a fiery skipper, the silver spotted skipper. We got azure butterflies. We get pearl crescents, lots of morning cloaks, buckeyes, commas, question marks, which look very similar, but there's slight differences. And then Sphinx moths are super cool. And this one was a big one. I mean, it was a pretty darn big moth. It's called the bride. And then I found this really cool grapevine beetle. Their host plant is the Virginia creeper. Super cool. And lots of lightning bugs. They like to eat snails and slugs and insect larvae. So that's a really good predatory insect. So because we leave everything up and have a healthy habitat, we get a ton of lightning bugs. Praying mantis, always fun and interesting to see. And then other bird garden benefits. It's just super fun. It's really good for you. Many health benefits. It's been a lifesaver during COVID. I mean, bird watching in my own backyard has been fabulous. It's really educational. These are my young nieces and nephews. They're getting a little bit older now, but they love our backyard. And I'm hoping that it instills just an environmental awareness into the younger generation. So you can get involved with citizen science. I regularly participate in citizen science. I do Project Feeder Watch. So that's a yearly count. It runs from early November through with the pandemic, they're ending it at the end of April, which is great. They extended it. And you take 2 consecutive days out of the week. I take Saturday and Sunday because I'm usually off of work. And you monitor what species you see in your yard, and you enter the data into the Cornell site, and they really use this data. The Great Backyard Bird Count, that's a yearly 4-day count in February. The Global Big Day is super fun. That's a 1-day count in May, so that's coming up. eBird is a great online tool to record your sightings. And then Journey North is just a fun one to see like where the birds are migrating or the insects. So books that I recommend, Doug Talmey's books are fabulous. Bringing Nature Home, really good one. Nature's Best Hope, and I'm like really honored that he chose our garden to be an example in that book. This is a good one too, Birdscaping in the Midwest. I saw this woman speak at a Wild Things conference about, I don't know, 6 years ago. Lots of good tips in there. And then if you get into identifying birds, the Sibley Sibley's got an app, and his books are great. He's a really super nice, humble guy. I bird watched with him, and a really nice guy. And then Cornell Lab of Ornithology online, all about birds. Wow, it's a really great site, all sorts of info. So, in conclusion, this is what I do for happy hour. I pour myself my favorite beverage, which is a glass of white wine, and I sit out there and record the birds that I see. So get out there and enjoy the birds. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Pam. That was great. Very inspiring. We do have a few questions that we can move on to, but let me point out, I should have primed you for this. The silver spotted skipper, when we teach butterfly ID here in the Nashville area, we tell folks it has a white guitar on the underside of its wing.
Okay.
And we allow people to call it the Nashville skipper without punishing them.
Cool.
Okay, so let me back up. And you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question directly to Pam. We can be pretty informal about this. Somebody asked me to repost your document, so I did that. Is there anything you want to say about the document to prime people about what it's about?
The document, I list all of the plants that I talk about, plus many more. I just went through and picked the plants that I find to be the most successful in our garden. I put a dot by my favorites, but it's really hard to pick my favorites.
Right.
I did include some non-native species that are good for the pollinators. And then I talk about like sources where you can find free information and free ID information. And then just a general, the ingredients of what makes up a bird garden. So it's a pretty comprehensive document.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I was very impressed with that. So the first question, Amanda Johnson asked, are there any plants that are particularly easy to start with? So if somebody is starting off converting their traditional yard into a native area, what are some things that are particularly easy to start with?
Well, it depends on their lighting conditions. So if it's sunny, coneflowers are fabulous. Penstemon is really great because there's different types of penstemon that work in shade or in sun or both. And on my list of plants, I give the light, I show what the light requirements are so they can like look at that plant list, look at the lighting conditions, and then just do some extra research on there too. So those two are excellent. In shade, Wild Ginger does fantastic ground cover. Rudbeckias are really good. That's the Black-Eyed Susan family because it provides a lot of seed head for the fall migrants and winter. Oh my gosh, there's just so many good ones. So I say to that person that asked the question, download that list and really give it a good look, because the ones that I put a dot next to, I have found they do very, very well in our garden and should be easy.
All right, great. Next question was, how do you avoid powdery mildew with all the beautiful intermixing?
Well, I do get a little bit of powdery mildew on the phlox, but frankly, not very much. I also get it on the bee balm, the Monarda, but to me, it's cosmetic, so the leaves fall off, and it's just part of a natural garden. You're going to have a little bit of powdery mildew. So I don't let it bother me. That's like one of those things about embracing imperfection. I don't like to spray stuff on it to get rid of it. You can thin out your phlox, trim some of them out to give it a little bit more air and circulation. That would help. But yeah, I don't let it bother me that much.
Yeah, you could also use the 10-step method for, take 10 steps backwards and you won't be bothered by the powdery mildew so much.
There you go.
Yeah. Doug Tallamy credits someone in New Orleans for coming up with that. I don't have much of a problem with that on phlox, but I definitely have it on the Monarda.
Yeah.
And I just leave it and it's fine. It's not like when I had Manhattan euonymus hedges, it was eaten up with powdery mildew and it drove me crazy. So after I yanked all those out, I was much happier.
Yeah.
Someone points out that Amazon has solar-powered pump fountains to add movement to a water feature for as little as $12, and they have one that works great.
Great.
Hey, Richard, I use water warp. What are they called? Water. Anyway, they're little round things that have spinning things on the bottom, and you just put it in the water. The
Yeah.
problem with those, I have a lot of trees. Problem with those solar powered ones, in my yard anyway, they're rarely on. If they don't have full bright sunlight, they don't turn on. But they make a again, I can't remember the names, water warbler or water wiggler, and it lasts for about 3 months. You just put 2 batteries in it, and it does 2 things. It gets the water moving so the birds see it, and it keeps mosquitoes from laying eggs in it. So
Right. That's a good feature to have. Let's see next. Lots of kudos and thank yous. I'll save the chat and send that to you. So
Oh, okay.
you won't miss any of the complimentary statements. But just to stick with the questions, let's see. Amy says, you recommended not deadheading, which is great. Does not deadheading change the new growth at all? Or do you deadhead right when new growth starts to happen? So she's just asking you to explain the deadheading method.
Deadheading. Well, I mean, there's a couple of ways you can do it. Like some plants, actually, I'm going to try this year because Joe Pyeweed gets really, really tall. And I watched Wild Ones presentation here, a West Cook Wild Ones presentation. And you can like early in the season, you can cut it like I think it was in June, you can cut it down and it will still bloom, but it won't be so tall. You can do the same thing with flax. I've done that because I do tend gardens, and you can cut the flax so it doesn't get so leggy and tall and flap over. If you cut it in June, it'll bloom a little later. That's actually another good way to stagger blooming. Cut some of them, leave some of them uncut. And then also like asters, same thing. You can trim them up in June. It might be a little earlier down in Nashville, because you're a little bit warmer. So that it either staggers or it doesn't get so long and leggy. And then as far as deadheading goes, like flax, like I wait till it's done blooming and then I just cut it off. And I don't do all of them because I want to leave some of those seed heads up for the birds. But I want later blooms too. So I just cut it off and it sends out new shoots and reblooms.
Yeah. This may sound crazy, but you can also do that to a certain extent with common milkweed. If you leave half of it alone and the other half, when it first starts to bloom, cut it about 4 inches off the ground, then it will regrow and you'll have fresh milkweed leaves later in the season than the original milkweed.
Very cool.
That's a project, I think, sponsored by Michigan State University. So they may still have some information about that if anyone's interested.
Cool. I'll look that up.
So last year I had 110 common milkweed plants. So I did that to half of them, and it made things a little easier to care for.
Cool. I'll try that because I have a lot of milkweed.
Okay. More compliments. Just feel very complimented, Pam.
Thanks. After a long day at work, I'll take it.
Yeah. So what are some sources for creating a pond with a stream?
Well, I had up here in the Chicagoland area, I had mine installed by a company called Aquascape. And I know they install like all over the world now. My mom's neighbor was one of the very first clients of theirs, probably, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe even 25 years ago. But now they run a big company, and they actually, other landscape companies can go and get certified through them. So there's probably plenty of places down in the Nashville area that are certified through Aquascape to do pond installs.
We have one in Franklin that does installs, or will sell you whatever you want to do a do-it-yourself install.
Yeah, they have kits. It depends on how handy you are. You can totally get like a small kit and install it yourself. I just went the route to like hire them to put it in for me. I knew where I wanted it to go, but it was too big of a job for me to do.
Yeah. Another question about a person who newly has a dog, new to native planting. gets nervous about planting something that could be toxic to the dog. Is this something you encourage folks to think about, or is the risk actually lower than I imagine?
Yeah, it depends. It depends on the dog. I mean, not all dogs chew plants. So you would want to research that. I know penstemon, it does have some toxic properties. Just research the plants that you're planning on putting in. Monkshood has got toxic properties. So yeah, you'll just want to just double check and make sure. I mean, any good website about plants will tell you if it's a toxic plant to dogs.
Right. And milk, you might want to avoid common milkweed too, for example. Anything in the dogbane family might be a good thing to skip, but it's actually not a problem in my experience. But yes, do research it. When you start a garden to attract birds, do you focus on attracting specific birds or just build an oasis and see who shows up?
I just built an oasis in it to see who shows up.
So
I mean,
you-
what I found was as I expanded the garden, like I started small and I saw what was showing up. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, if I made it bigger, maybe I'll get more, you know? And so I just kept like expanding it and expanding it. And more and more and more diversity started coming. So that was a big reason I wanted to add a water feature, because I wanted even more diversity. I initially thought I'd want to put just like bluegill and bass in our pond so that the great blue herons can fish in it. But the guy was saying, well, you're not gonna be able to see those. Those are really, they'll hide in the rocks and stuff. So, we just put in some goldfish, and they come and fish. I mean, it's super fun to see the great blue herons fishing in there. We even got a green heron fishing in there. I mean, oh my gosh. So yeah, as you expand and add more, that's why I say diversity, diversity, diversity. You want to hit all those different types of bird diets. So just add as much variety as you can, and you should be able to attract different types of bird. And I have to say, it takes them a while to find it. I mean, don't expect to do it in the same year or attract all these species. It's been a long process. But now they know it's an oasis to stop at. And I think that's part of the reason we get such a good diversity of birds.
And Janine asks, what kind of milkweed do you have? I think you talked about 3 in your presentation.
Yeah, well, the 3 that work really, really well in our garden are the common, the butterfly, which is the orange one, and the swamp, which is the pink one. I tried World last year, but the bunnies ate it, which really surprised me, because mammals are not supposed to like it, but they mowed it down. So we'll see if it comes back up. But so I stick to those 3, the common, the swamp, and the butterfly. And the eggs, they lay the eggs on the common and the swamp, mostly on the common. That's the real one you want for the monarchs.
Right. Yeah, I have much more luck with common for the eggs, but the butterflies is maybe a better landscape feature plant.
It is. It's a manageable size, and it produces really good nectar.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the end of the questions. If I overlooked a question, somebody just jump in and go ahead and ask, but we'll give a minute for people to unmute themselves.
Richard, I had a question, and I think somebody else in the group had a question as well. Pam, do you stop feeding your birds during the summer season?
I back off a lot. I mean, I always have food out there for hummingbirds. Those guys I do all through the summer, but I back off quite a bit of feeding because there's just so much food out there. And also I want them to kind of find it naturally in the garden. And I don't want a whole lot of competition going on, because there's a lot of babies back there. So I definitely back off. I don't stop completely, but I back off. Yeah.
See, I have a question, Richard. Am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Okay. Do you have any particular way to control the common milkweed?
Yeah, I call it editing, and it's got the nice long taproot. So I get as much of that taproot as I can, and then I share it. I give a lot of it away I've got a friend who's, her parents own a big property and she's turning it over to natives. So I've given her a lot of it. There's always people that want common milkweed because of the monarch situation. So I give it away and it transplants really well. I mean, that's how I started my patch is I took a transplant from my brother-in-law's garden.
Come to our
But it
plant
comes
sale.
up in different,
Yeah, it comes up in different places. I think that's kind of cool. It's like a nice little surprise. I like to see how it behaves in different areas. I find in our garden that the shadier spots where it's growing tends to get more eggs. So yeah, so I leave it, I edit it out because it can be aggressive. Again, we've got super clayey soil. If you've got loamy soil, I bet it can get pretty aggressive. But our clay soil keeps things in control.
okay.
If you come to our plant sale, you can buy all of my milkweed that popped up in my neighbor's yard. He was cool about it, but I thought it was best for me to go ahead and nip that one in the bud before it took over his whole yard. So, but yeah, you have to dig up a lot of it. You can't just pull it and plant.
Yeah, you got to get a lot of that taproot. Yeah.
We have hummingbirds that can apparently overwinter here in Nashville because some people, in fact, a lot of people leave their feeders up all winter.
Wow, cool.
And then if you do get a strike in the winter, there's a lady in Clarksville, Tennessee, Brian, you can remind me of her name, Cindy Routledge, that will come to your bird feeder and band the bird and do all the measurements that she does.
Wow, that's cool.
Other questions or comments? I did, by the way, start the recording about halfway into Andra's introduction.
Oh, okay.
So sorry, Andra, I may ask you to give me an encore. I never record the minutes, but I'll make the recording available on our chapter YouTube channel as soon as I can get to it. So I'll send you a note.
Great.
Well, that was fabulous, Pam. I see
Oh.
why you were willing to go after Doug. I knew you would. I knew you would do very well. So
I feel like it's a good dovetail to his concepts. Just to show how it actually works.
Right. He's got the theoretical overview, and you've got the practical. Here's what I did story. So that's great.
Yeah, it's a joy. It really is.
Yeah. You make that pretty clear in your presentation. So.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We had just for the numbers, I know we got up to 40 people, but we had a lot of different people that kept coming and going. So we had a lot of late entrants and people had already dropped out. So there must have been 45 or so different people that were here for a good part of the presentation.
Oh, good.
So great. Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. Hope you enjoy your night.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Pam.
Sandra.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Pam.
Oh, you're welcome.